I guess while we're doing this, we can start. Thanks so much for joining us today here in the room as well as online to celebrate the opening, the second opening of the exhibition, I Don't Know You Like That, the Bodywork of Hospitality. Today we're in for a treat. We'll hear from 4 artists. The afternoon will proceed as follows. Each artist will speak for 20 minutes. After that, the panel will surely have questions for each other, and then we will open to questions from the floor and people online. So we're expecting to stay on schedule and to be chatting for about 2 hours. I want to start by thanking all the people who made this possible. First and foremost, people here at UB Art Gallery, starting with the great team of installers who worked with a lot of energy and dedication to make this happen. Thank you. Great. Perfect. Including Tom Anderson, Jason Seeley, Alison Cortes, and also Nick Olsness. Also thanks to the director and curator of UB Art Galleries, Bob Scalisi and Anna Wager, for making this possible, and 3 other installers who helped us to make this happen: MJ Myers, Eric Huck, and Kathy Gaudy. This exhibition is also made possible thanks to the support of many funders, including the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Culture Fund. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Celina. Celina Eceiza is coming today from Buenos Aires, and she's been working for a month in the installation downstairs. She's both a visual artist and a writer, and she's published a couple of books now. Solo exhibitions of her work have been held at the Moria Gallery in Buenos Aires, at Movil, at Big Sur Gallery, at Mundo Dios in Mar del Plata, which is her hometown, and Agata Costure and Isla Florente. Her work has also been featured in group exhibitions in Argentina, in Mexico, and most recently at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. Her first novel, El Falsificador, The Counterfeiter, was published by Tammy Meltzer Publishing in 2018, and she received the Konex Awards Merit Diploma in Textile Arts this year. Thanks so much, Celina. And if someone could turn off the big light, that would be really great, so that we can see the work. Okay, so how can we make sure we have a good image?
You can turn it off, but it's just going to be the
Okay.
Yeah, and I see my notes.
Great.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. The work that I'm presenting here was. Okay. The work that I'm presenting here calls La vida terrenal reconquista al soñador, which means earthly life reconquers the dreamer. And how Sylvie says, I've been working here for 3-4 weeks, and I have planned the exhibition in Argentina. I work with a SketchUp, and basically the work is like make a suit for a space, like a fit suit for a space. But a lot of things that I don't plan start to happen when I'm in the space. So the image that we are going to see is basically what it's around the work. The work has a lot of layers, and some of the layers are visible, and the others are like or suspected or like energies that go around the work. So the first thing that I want to say is that the exhibition, when you look it from on top, if you can do that, it has a kidney form, And for me, that was like a symbolic message that the exhibition has, because the kidney basically is the organ that grabs what we don't need and throw it away, and takes the energy that we need to make things. And at first, for me, this was like a nice metaphor, but I think that this started to make the forms that we found at the work. So basically, a lot of a part of my work is a mystery to me. I invite to see the work more as questions than answer to certain things. And well, as Sylvie wrote in the text, in my work, the body is a host to experience, and I consider that the public is so important on that, because basically I work with dimensions that go from the big and to the small, and that it's more like a body experience also that a visual experience. So I'm gonna go. When one of the things when I came here, I went to see a farm exhibition, and there were like these big pumpkins, and I have the idea of, I was working in Argentina with the idea of pumpkins, but then I ran in here to that. So I think that the work was pretty much planned, but be able to work in here was really important for me, because it's like go farther onto the work, you know. And one thing, I'm gonna look for a note that I have. One thing that I was asking about, and I don't have the answer, but is that in Argentina there's a lot of talk about every work is politic. And I start to think about how my work is politic, you know? In what form, if everything is politic? So, well, I start to think, well, okay, I think that I threw away in my work the idea of the white cube. And I start to think that, okay, the white cube is a really decision that it's quite politic, you know? The white, the clean, as the best way to see something. So that's really structural in my work, like how we see things. In my work, I think that distraction, it's a good element to see. So I think that that's one of the first layers that start to think as a political matter. And other thing that I was thinking, I'm sorry, I'm gonna look for the note. I have a lot of notes, sorry. I every time I came with some idea, I write it. Yeah. And another thing to my work is that it's big, it's immersive, like you have to be with your body in there. But I try to give the freedom to the public, because a lot of times people like ask me like what this drawing means, and I try to do to encourage to get to the image with freedom, and it's the same freedom that I give to myself. I think that we are used to analyze the things in a very mind way, but I'm also interested in the experience that not necessarily go through the mind, or you can learn a lot through the body, through the experience. So I think that's another politic layer, because we live in a world that basically look forward to have answers to everything, And I'm the kind of person that prefers the questions. And I think that a good way to get through the work is with questions or with the sensations. And yeah, I think that's another thing that I've been thinking. I don't have like the complete answer. So for me, it was really important to share that concern, you know, because I think that the work stand-ups, in some way, it's a lot of production, but it's a non-production work. Like, I don't know if in the productive or the capitalism world they value that kind of sensations that provoke. So that's one of the things. And another thing that I want to talk about, this is my house and this is how I work basically. I have a studio, but my house is my studio, and I start to like be with the work in all the places. But basically I only see the work when I'm installer, and it only exists on the play. I don't do it again in another places, because it's how I was saying, like I make a suit for one person particular, but for the space. So every work is unique, and that's another layer, no? Like, I think that on this freedom that I was talking before, that I try to give to the public, it works like with more individually, you know. There's this idea that we are all the same, and yeah, we are all the same, but we think different things. And what I like that the persons that come to the installation don't dismiss all what they bring. They can be able to incorporate onto the work. And yeah, I think that there's many ways of reading the work as persons that come to the exhibition. And yeah, another thing was that the exhibition will be transformed during the 6 months that we'll run through. And because, well, basically it's an installation to be lived, and also the idea of death is something that is going through my mind, like how we face death in this society. And I guess that my interpretation of death in this work is that many of the small sculptures will be broken, so we are going to fabricate this sculpture cemetery for these sculptures. And another layer of my work is the idea of feeding, you know? And another interpretation is that, well, the show is running and this sculpture is going to be at the cemetery. There's also going to be a lot of extra sculptures to feed the exhibition. So yeah, I invite you all to come every time that you can. So you're going to see new pieces. And another thing that was important to me is I would love if sometimes the people need a space to read, or a space to be, or a space to rest. The work is open to that. So yeah, I think that was really important. When another layer of the work, I will pass another image. Another layer of the work, I think it's being recorded by the host of participants.
Sí.
Got it?
Got it. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Another layer is the type of construction. I think that my work refers to a construction of how do you say when there's no, like, the communities that live moving?
Itinerant.
Yeah, like the itinerant communities. And this kind of constructions has something really particular that basically are for communities. And it's not for the idea of a family as a private property, you know, like the house. I think that the work has a spirit of community, you know? And another of the layers are the idea of the rest. You can see the work not only like straight, like the traditional way. I think that the best way to see the work is, as I was saying before, like with distraction, in the meaning that the site can look for it. In other words, you can see it, you can relay. So the idea of relaying is really important for me. And well, the idea of the floor, that is not only as something to be on top of, it's also like a superficie of sensations, and it has temperature, and it changes the space for completely. So yeah, I'm gonna.
Just click the image.
On the image with the cursor. Let's see.
Will they let you move now to the next image or not?
Let's see. Try.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and continue with this idea of the straight. I think that it's another answer that I wasn't thinking, but it's also really, really political, the way that we see things as straight. And it's also ideologic, profoundly ideologic, you know? It's like you have to be, it's supposed to be that when you relay, you're not producing anything. So if you see a work straight, you are producing acknowledgement or another kind of extra thing from that. So yeah, the relays are another way to experience the work. Yeah. Oh yeah, and another thing on my work is like, for me, the thread that union all the work is the drawing. It's like something that I've been doing since I can remember, and I think the whole installation like in a drawing experience way. Well, these are some of the books, and yeah, I basically try to interpret, to get like the interpretation of the work as a simultaneous layers. So it gives to me a lot of freedom on that, because it's I think that I can allow the others what I permit myself. So yeah, I think that that I can. Oh, what I wanted to say is temporary architectures. Today I have my note. Yeah, yeah, and I think that this kind of architectures are also like, it has to do with communal practice, and I hope that this work can allow that when the people are, they don't have to be like on top of the work, like paying so much attention. You can go back and go in onto the work. So yeah, and another idea that I've been working on my other works is there's always a passage, like in here where it's part of the kidney, but I always work with the idea of the passage as a space where the material leads to different states. And well, also in the exhibition, one of the books, who is written by Begonia Rigoni, basically what I, what I do here, Begonia is my alter ego, it's me, and basically it's the character that I create to be able to write poetry. Because as Celina, I was so embarrassed, but as Begonia, it's much easy. So basically, she has a biography, she has everything. She's like another part of me. So that's for me a possibility that art brings me. Like you can have all the colors that you can develop yourself, like the shades between those colors. So yeah, I think that now I finished. Yeah. Oh, I put some. I have more images. Oh, and this is one of my first drawings. Thank you so much.
This one. Hello.
Welcome, Berenice.
Yes.
Berenice lives and works in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Thank you. Berenice lives and works in Mexico City. Her recent solo exhibitions include Hickent and Nunk at the Kunsthal Basel, which was a huge success just this summer. Eceiza at Simeon in Copenhagen, exhibitions at her gallery in Cologne, Jan Kaps, and at Lodos in Mexico City. Recent group exhibitions include To Begin Again, which is on view now at the ICA in Boston, Crip Time at the Museum for Modern Art in Frankfurt, Other Worlds, or Otrex Mundex, at the Museo Tamayo in Mexico City, and several other institutions across Europe and North America. And without further ado, please welcome Berenice Olmedo.
Hello. I will present my actual or current project that is called Anthroprosthetic, and is about to think the disability as human condition. So, disability as anthropogenesis allows us to reflect upon a humanity that has to be learned rather than being granted at birth. Man is born without knowing how to speak, write, eat, or walk, unless being taught. He is incapable of surviving without the civilizing cares of culture. Hence, technique is presented as the mastery of the relationship between nature and humanity. If a man is taught by nature without survival abilities, technique allows him to produce himself. What we can think is about how many artifacts we use through life that is a metaphor of a wheelchair, as could be the walker or a stroller. Oh no. This is a video, but how can yeah. Okay, so under the guardianship of a relatively outdated thinking model, one of the distinctions of what is human is expressed with an anatomical behavior, walking upright. The operations to discipline the body, in which a human can be decided as one, have kept verticality as their axis. The training of the body is a mechanism of coercions, and the discipline is a political anatomy of detail. If anthropotechniques are the sets of actions or exercises, both symbolical and formal, that allow humans to recognize themselves as such, it is because we are beings of technique, because we turn the things we produce into our condition. In this sense, walking upright is a technology, a logos of the techne, a know-how, a practical knowledge to discipline the body. Prostheses are technical devices, but they also precede that. Prostheses are linguistic. If we take our distance from the medical sense of a prosthesis, that is to say, of the addition or replacement of a missing body part for an artificial one, a prosthesis would be not a simple extension of the human body, but the human condition itself, its constitutions. Therefore, there is no human nature. Facing nature, the human is entirely prosthetic. If human beings are disabled beings, who has the capacity to represent normality? It would seem easy and not so risky to question disability from the comfort of a body without no motor limitations, amputations, or congenital anomalies, yet the disability is not limited to the phenomena occurring in the body. Disability is political. Women, in this sense, we have not been exempt from being historically disabled. Social class is involved in the political dimension of prosthetics and orthotics in Mexico, and it is necessary to consider that in the most violent and precarious areas, the risk of not only losing a body part but the life itself rises exponentially. People with disabilities derived from an amputation or the lack of a limb can hardly conceive receiving a replacement for a high technology and sophisticated device in Mexico. So in Mexico, the prosthetics and orthotics are precarious, and it is also important that disability cases are proportional to the marginalization index. Thus, it is more than symbolic to try to teach a human how to walk in a country where the population is constantly falling into pieces. Orthotics and prosthetics are not vestiges of the foreign disease, but political projections of the body. They are processes, actions, or states of the existence. They not only suggest, based on the conditions of physical decadence of the human, when can a body be considered useless or irreparable, but with the fragility at stake, the identity and processes that give a body order are disrupted, and the capacity of objects or technical devices for political action is debated. Furthermore, when prosthetics are only physical, when the materiality connected to the use purpose is not surpassed, prosthetics and orthotics may fall into a reductionism and merely become cultural tools of normalization with a compulsive spotlight on corporeal norms, and rather than threatening the sphere of normality, they reaffirm it. First, physiognomically, they have to perform how a normal-looking body should. Secondly, the purpose is determined by its usefulness and productivity for economic systems. If the shape of the human being is determined by the logic of its functionality and productivity in relation to the work, and if work was the only essential action of the human being, what happens with the disabilities that escape efficiency and effectiveness in production? Perhaps the act of a man producing himself is a form of exercise. Perhaps there are ways of doing it and producing his own existence, and it is more about deciphering himself in every life. Disability is given based on the expectations imposed on the functionality of people, what is expected of them to do or not to do, in spite of advocating from a perspective of subjective independence. This is an autonomy subjected to an utilitarian view of the body. is the tension between measuring and assigning the body types that are necessary to constitute and materialize the ideal citizens of a society.
Only some bodies are allowed down here. We shape, re-educate, rehabilitate. Is there only one acceptable way of being present? One way of being human, straight, and vertical. Can we make space for all bodies?
Every time we talk about human rights, it becomes evident that humanism is not universal, but maybe quite relative to a certain situations, and the freedom or the human rights have to be limited at certain frontiers. This is not a matter of the biological traits of the human species, but of the political disability of precarious lives, of the human forms that lack acknowledgement in the dominant political debates and whose biological existence is limited to the areas of exception. If persons with disabilities are perceived in the social imaginary as cripples that produce pity, then that is because being human is not considered to be a constant training that must be exercised. A being that struggles with itself to go beyond its shape should not cause any pity. The tendency to pathologize the body based on the yearning of normality is a deliberate exclusion of the other possibilities of the human experience. Correcting is not merely correcting nature, but surprising difference. If existence has always required orthopedics and prosthetics, how do we embody and think the non-normative? How can we avoid being under public scrutiny, having to do normal things through hard exercise? So, Disability has a disruptive potential that can broaden the horizons of the human condition, sense, and significance. If the human being is a prosthetic being, it's because they are artifacts of themselves, because they have the ability to technically intervene in their own nature by producing prosthetics that allows them to enunciate and constitute themselves transversally between corporeal limits to create conditions of possibility that are an opening to think about themselves more as living rather than as humans. So in this sculpture, the interest was to contrast two types of deformations in the legs and in the feet. The first is by choice and is considered aesthetic, as is in the case of the ballet, and the second, the genetic and involuntary deformation that is considered a pathology. In both cases, being upright is a challenge, since both in ballet and in children who use this type of orthosis, adapting to the deformation is an exercise. CSO, that is Cuerpo Sin Órganos, stands for the body without organs, which is a concept taken from the book A Thousand Plateaus by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. The body without organs denies the supposed nature and purpose of the organs and their functions in the body. So the organs are defined, this is the assumption that the organs are defined according to specific functions or purpose. So the body without organs denies the supposed nature of the organs. The body without organs, it is an experience of the powers of the body, outside of the scientific thinking in which organs and functions are established. The body without organs is a strategy to inhabit the body without these hierarchies and presupposed subordinations. So the organism as a stratum imposes forms, functions, dominant and hierarchical organization in order to extract useful work from it. So in a process of body without organs or disorganization of the body, what we have is an unfolding of intensities that occur each one as an aexeidades. So to finish, if life is variation, then we must appeal to diverse bodies, bodies that are alterable, accidental, fragile, susceptible of receiving constant modifications. If we are fluid beings made of fibers, we must encourage the border of the human to border other natures. We must steer the body away from the human specificity that is conditioned to the anthropomorphic hierarchy to being male, adult, white, to make it become an encounter of the movement with the feminine, the infantile, other races and other genders. If so, there would be not disability, but only variations in existence, variations in movement, variations of slowness and speed. Thank you.
Jacob is a Toronto-based artist whose work destabilizes viewing convention and invites collisions of meaning. Since participating in Documenta 12 in 2007, he's achieved an international reputation with exhibitions at the Museum of, I guess, Modern Art in Salzburg, Austria, the Museum, I will not attempt to pronounce that, my German is horrible, but the Kunstverein in Stuttgart, the Toronto Biennial of Art, the Montreal Biennial, Tanya Bonakdar Gallery in New York, and the Taipei Biennial, among several other institutions. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you, Sylvie, for organizing this gathering and the exhibition. I think you've done an amazing job bringing together very different practices, but that start to resonate with each other in such powerful ways. So it's an honor to be speaking in the context of all the other artists here. So I'm just going to give a quick, I'm going to follow one thread. I'm not going to try to talk everything about the works that you can experience yourselves. But I have in the exhibition two works, album 11 that you see in the hallway here, and then the statue that's on the other side of the wall, the Sphinx. So for this presentation, I'm going to start halfway through the album, which you'll see almost at the midpoint of the album. You see these two panels, and I decided to start kind of in the middle. You'll see, as you can find here, the album is composed of images cut out from books and magazines, and the images have been arranged in clusters and then laminated in plastic laminates that go from panel to panel to panel, so that through associations, each viewer is able to kind of construct different set of correspondences or narratives or stories. I chose this because I wanted to start with these images of the vacuum cleaners and the monochromes, like the kind of blank space that you see behind the two figures here. And I'm also struck by the image over there of Pipi Lottie wrist, almost like pressing her face on the glass, and her nose is squished and her lips are squished. It's almost like she's been compressed in the plastic laminates of the panel, and she's kind of knocking on our door, like telling us, let me out. But I'm also interested by the shape of her hands, the kind of almost the frame gesture that she's making with her fingers. This framing gesture obviously is picked up in the Sphinx sculpture. I'm very interested in this idea of the frame as a viewing device. It doesn't just kind of frame something, it actually instructs us to look at something in a particular way. I think that the frame, all frames, are instruments that direct and misdirect our attention. So this is something that I've been thinking about when I first presented this work at Nuit Blanche in Toronto in 2015. It was first exhibited at Allen Gardens, so this public park that had all these greenhouses. So it's nice to see it return in a space here at the gallery that has this relationship to the outside world. In the first presentation of the work, I was interested in the greenhouse as a space for cultivation. It's a kind of cultured nature, but where things are supposed to be cultivated and allowed to grow. Surrounding the sculpture was a series of vitrines containing a collection of books that I have put together. I'm very interested in narratives of place, and the place where I live is Toronto. So I've been collecting material, publications about Toronto from, let's say, 1860 or something like that until today. So the vitrines, there were 6 of them, contain a kind of chronology of various ways in which the city, the place where I live, has been framed by different from different perspectives. And I wanted these books also to be in conversation with the cultivating, the park but also the cultivation of the greenhouse. I've been quite struck by there's an artist who lived in London, Ontario, so it's a city a couple of hours west of Toronto, Greg Curnow, who wrote a book, a kind of amazing book titled Deeds Abstracts, The History of a London Lot. So he told the history of just the lot, the property of his house. So in some regards, it's a totally insignificant lot, piece of land. But on the other hand, anything insignificant has many rich stories, histories, if one cares to look. So he tried to find out as much as possible about this insignificant piece of land. And in this book, he wrote something that quite struck me. He said, "I have felt the power of many details, adding up to an understanding of the ground I am standing on. It is an understanding that is new to me." So I love this idea of many details adding up to an understanding of the ground that I'm standing on. So as I think about Toronto, I've been noticing kind of almost two allegorical figures that allow me to, that I see as kind of appearing time and time again. One figure I call the Tangled Garden, and the other figure I call the Vacant Lot. So I'm going to focus mainly on the vacant lot. I'm going to show an image of a print, a silkscreen print that I made in 2016 titled The Ward. And it's an aerial view of Toronto in the mid-1950s. And you can see this kind of monochrome square has been superimposed on the city. It comes from an archival document titled Conditions of Competition, City Hall and Square from 1957. So this image was made by kind of photoshopping an aerial view of the downtown in the mid-1950s. And the blanked out area is a neighborhood that titled The Ward, that in the 50s was going to be developed to become the new city hall of the city. And so they kind of photoshopped this area as if there was nothing there. And this image was given to the architects, the international architects around the world who would submit design proposals for the new city hall. So I'm quite struck by this image. I'm trying to understand, what is it telling us? What is it telling me? What philosophy or ideology or bias or frame does it bring to how it understands the place that I live in? So I'll say something about the Ward neighborhood. This is a photograph of the Ward in 1929. So kind of the bottom half of the image is that empty space in the previous image. So the Ward is a working class and immigrant neighborhood where today Villiers-Revel's modern city hall now stands. And I'm going to show another image sort of around this time from 1926. This is a photograph of the family that's part of the British Methodist Episcopal Church on Chestnut Street, taken in 1926. So this neighborhood, the Ward, in the mid-1800s, so about 100 years before the Photoshop image that I showed you, this neighborhood was home to Toronto's African-Canadian community, many of whom were escaped slaves and freed people from the US, as well as neighborhood brought a lot of Jewish and Italian communities who settled there in the early 20th century. Incidentally, the painter Lauren Harris, known for some of you Canadian art folks as part of the group of 7 artists, created some early paintings of this neighborhood. This is a photograph of that neighborhood in 1946. This photograph is in 1950s, but in 1946, City Council approved the expropriation of the entire neighborhood. So the land was expropriated by the city and entirely bulldozed. So they literally erased everything in that neighborhood, which incidentally was also the place of the city's first Chinatown. So today we talk about how multicultural Toronto is and all this stuff. Well, this is this multicultural city that existed in the 19th century, but which the city itself decided to erase. Another photograph in the 1950s, the vacant lot was literally used as a parking lot for a few years. And then in the 1960s, this proposal was made to build a city hall on the left, as well as a series of commercial high-rise towers. So this lot was supposed to get a lot bigger. In the end, only the city hall was built, although the rest of the land was also demolished to make the Eaton Center. This is an image of the construction. So underneath the parking lots, they started to kind of build the foundations for the new city hall. And here's the new city hall in 1965. So that's a kind of very fast kind of general history, but just to give you a flavor of what this refuses to show. And I'm interested in this refusal. I think this refusal has a lot to tell us. Some of the things that I've just told you about today appear in this photograph as a kind of clean slate, as a blank space, as terra nullius, this nobody's land that's available for colonization. So now I can return to the album and the images of the vacuum cleaners and the monochromes. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I think it's a lot more fun to see the album and kind of narrate it yourself. So when the artist tells you, it kind of like frames things too much. But I'm just going to show you some things and see what associations can come up. So I'm just going to follow the album for a little while so that you can see how the narratives kind of unfold. I find it intriguing that the monochrome has now become a kind of panel on a wall, a sheet of paper to kind of point to, a stage, and a framed image that it's itself an image of a frame. Then it continues with Yves Klein on the left, about to take the X-Acto knife and kind of cut the monochrome, paired with these images of twinned clocks and watches. So something kind of now becomes a double. I love that that watch is see-through. It's a twin, but one of the twins is kind of an X-ray of the other. This idea of the split, the cut, the seam, the front and back. So you see the did I say Yves Klein before? I meant Lucio Fontana. Okay, I meant Lucio Fontana. But on the top you have one of Lucio Fontana's pieces with the cut. But what you rarely get to see is the back of those paintings. So a kind of X-ray of looking at the other side. And suddenly these kind of doubles, mirrorings, cuts, saws become environmental, become kind of places that people can kind of inhabit and navigate. This is a photograph of the stairwell where I live. This was taken in October 27th, 2018. And here's an image of that just a couple of months before in August 2017. So not a couple of months, I guess, almost a full year. But this is what it looked like when we arrived. And then the building was sold to new owners. And in their wisdom, they decided to turn this into this. So you get a sense of what I'm talking about the vacant lot in dialogue or in tension with the tangled garden. There's this, and then there's this. And I'm interested, what is that about? Like, what is that about? What's happening here? What forms of hospitality can we describe? In the vacated photograph, you still see traces of the butterflies. There's still a couple of butterflies on the window. They're a lot lonelier now, it seems to me, but they're still hanging on. I'm going to show some pictures further up the street. This was in June 22nd, 2018. It's a vacant lot that's been designated as a construction site. So it's been fenced off, but in a way the fencing is letting the plants thrive. But just like literally 10 days later, that was turned into this. And this is something I see a lot. I mean, this isn't unique to Toronto, obviously, but I choose to say that it is characteristic of something quite powerful in Toronto, a certain way of being that I don't know, affects me. Of course, even before the bulldozer or the weed whacker came out, even the fencing is this framing device of the fence is already a kind of clock ticking on the expiry date of this little garden. So even before it was cut, the cutting had already begun by the construction of the fence. Like it's already, the fence is signaling a kind of expiry date. And in all of the images that I've shown you, I think I can hear the signals of this ticking clock. It's kind of a Morse code, like it's sending signals, and there's something I'm interested in trying to understand this Morse code of this ideology that permeates the environment where I live. I hear in this tick-tock signal a spirit that's obsessed by the idea that value is created simply by blanking something out. So this is my home. This is where I live. And this is the form of hospitality that I'm used to. This is what my people, so the people who colonize my brain, tell me the world is like. This is my education. This is what I learned to accept as the way of the world. I'm going to read a quote from someone named Northrop Frye, who's a literary theorist. Quite interesting. I learned a lot from Northrop Frye, who wrote an essay titled New World Without Revolution. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt while we see this image. He said, "The religion that the British and French brought to the New World was not a natural monotheism, like the Algonquin worship of a great spirit, but a revolutionary monotheism." So not a natural monotheism, but a revolutionary monotheism. The Christian teaching was that there were no gods in nature. It tended to assume that nature was simply something available for human exploitation. Everywhere we look today, we see the conquest of nature by an intelligence that does not love it, that feels no part of it, that splits off its own consciousness from it. I find it very moving, this idea of the conquest of nature by an intelligence that does not love it, that feels no part of it. I've been talking to some of you about this critical theory class that I'm teaching, so I'm like teaching young minds these days. So I'm doing this critical theory, and starting on Monday, we're going to talk about an author, Frédéric Lordon, who's written a book titled Willing Slaves of Capital. And there's a passage that I've assigned for my students where Lordon is writing about the idea of liquidity. Liquidity is a term used in finance, in investment, and he describes it as liquidity is the option to exit an asset market at any moment. It represents the minimal form of committing funds. So a liquid asset is something that you can, it's a commitment that you can exit at any time extremely quickly. So the more liquid the asset is, the faster you can turn it into cash. If it's not very liquid, it takes a long time to turn into cash. Now, this is how it's defined in kind of financial policy, financial ideas. But if we consider liquidity more broadly, not just within kind of investment practice, but as an attitude that affects things outside the world of investment, I think it's interesting to observe what Lordon described as the fundamentally antisocial character of liquidity, as the refusal of any durable commitment, as the desire to keep all options permanently open, namely to never have to take the other into consideration. You know, this idea of liquidity as kind of the fantasy that I never have to take the other into consideration, that the best option is to have all options open, right? The best version of things is the one that allows me to have the least commitment possible. I'm interested in imagining what forms of subjectivity that generates, what forms of community that generates, even what forms of culture and art making that generates. Anyway, I'm just going to end. I wanted to leave with this idea of the conquest of nature by an intelligence that does not love it. And I'm going to end with a poem. It's an excerpt of a poem by Margaret Atwood, and it's a poem that she called The Page. So I'm just going to read her words. This is an excerpt from a slightly longer thing, but it'll give you a flavor. The page waits, pretending to be blank. Is that its appeal, its blankness? What else is this smooth and white, this terrifyingly innocent? The page itself has no dimensions and no directions. There's no up or down except what you yourself mark. There's no thickness and weight, but those you put there. North and south do not exist unless you're certain of them. The page is without vistas and without sounds, without centers or edges. Because of this, you can become lost in it forever. If you decide to enter the page, take a knife and some matches and something that will float. Take something you could hold on to and a prism to split the light and a talisman that works, which should be hung on a chain around your neck. That's for getting back. It doesn't matter what kind of shoes, but your hands should not be bare. Your hands should be bare. You should never go into the page with gloves on. The question about the page is this: what is beneath it? It seems to have only 2 dimensions. You can pick it up and turn it over, and the back is the same as the front. Nothing, you say, disappointed. But you were looking in the wrong place. You were looking on the back instead of beneath. Beneath the page is another story. Beneath the page is a story. Beneath the page is everything that has ever happened, most of which you would rather not hear about. The page is not a pool, but a skin. A skin is there to hold in, and it can feel you touching it. Did you really think it would just lie there and do nothing? Thanks so much.
Lynne Marsh currently lives and works in Los Angeles. Her practice questions the status of the image through mediation, technology, and production. Ideas central to her research includes offstage space, production in production, affective and cultural labor, music as a framing device, and the Brechtian revealing of the mechanics of cultural and theatrical production. Solo exhibitions of her work have been presented at UCR Arts in Riverside, California, Tintype Gallery in London, the Berlinisch Gallery in Berlin, Opera North in Leeds, the ICA in London, Toronto International Film Festival, and the Musée d'Art Contemporain Montréal. Her work's also been featured in numerous group exhibitions and perennial events, including the Montreal Biennial, the Quebec City Biennial, and the 10th Istanbul Biennial. She's associate professor in the art department and also currently the chair at UC Riverside. Welcome.
Could we focus the, or maybe I can just zoom in here and see. Is the project? I just want to make sure the projector's focused. You don't have to read all this though. I'm so excited and honored to be part of this amazing exhibition and project. Thank you, Sylvie, for the invitation. And also, the work, for those of you online, I'll get to the work, but for those of you who've seen the exhibition, my work is a wallpaper print called Atlas, and the name of the figures on the Atlas, so Atlas Celina, Atlas Abriel, Atlas Jobel, etc. And I'll go through that. But I wanted to talk about how I got to this artwork, and it's part of a larger project, and really it was Sylvie who kind of highlighted this artifact for me, or this idea that it could stand alone. So what we're looking at here is a PDF for a broadsheet that I made called Score from Which to Create an Expanded Choreography. So my talk today will start with the research, and then it'll get a little bit into the how-to. A lot of my work is interested in the sort of apparatus behind production and featuring that apparatus as a sort of theater or performance in and of itself. The project started with going and looking at Abby Warburg's archive, the Mnemosyne Atlas. I don't know if you're familiar with Abby Warburg, but he was a German art historian and cultural theorist. He created the Mnemosyne Atlas in 1924 to 1929. And this is a picture here in the center of the Atlas. And the Atlas consisted of 79 panels of images. And what's interesting about the Atlas is there are photographs of artworks or newspaper clippings or found photography. So they're all reproductions of images or sculptures, objects. And there's a number of themes. So an atlas at that time was sort of like the slideshow to a lecture. Abby Warburg never got to the lecture. He just worked on the atlas, on the slideshow, it's a very open for interpretation kind of collage, almost a precursor to how we navigate digital space now with the sort of clicking from one image to another image. And so that was of interest to me. And in this, he did write a number of notes, and in the atlas he identified a feminine figure that he called the nympha. And so I was very interested in this nympha who sort of is a figure that reoccurred from antiquity to the contemporary moment. So she's a kind of time traveler. And he's very interested in the gesture of the nympha. And this figure also is the gesture and the figure is recontextualized in each moment in which they appear. So this became an interest for me because I was really thinking about, I moved to Southern California in 2017, and it's probably happening everywhere, but it was something I was really becoming very conscious of with my students in particular, this sort of individuation and this almost kind of neoliberal agenda of the special me. And I was really interested in what is making us human and how, and so this idea of the reoccurring motif and the recontextualizing and thinking about of the history. Of course, looking at a lot of these images as a woman, you can be quite horrified, but this idea that the history is malleable, that it can be material for rethinking, for reforming, for reshaping. And so I was really interested in that malleability as well. So the project started off then to find some performance. So let me go through this first. So I start by creating a score. Let me go back one more. And I'm cutting out, so when I visited the archive, I scanned images from the archive and I cut out the figures. And I create a score. And this was printed on a broadsheet, so I made a newspaper out of it. And at the end of the score, there's you can see some references to each image. I also categorize the images. So, for example, let's see if we can static abandonment, gestures of defense, violent abduction. So I'm kind of making a new kind of cartography from these images as well. So I decided to, and what was interesting with this project was I started to make the project and COVID hit. It was like bang. So the condition of working alone and working isolated on the one hand, but then trying to reach a community was really interesting to me. So I did some auditions with performers and selected 5 performers. And I'm going to just show you some of the early images and go through how we made the work. All of the performers had let's see, I'll play this, had the score. And so they were tasked with thinking about how to interpret the score through their own practice, thinking about things like the transition from one image to the other, or thinking about how they might invent or protest against certain gestures, and they were asked to improvise. So they started to just send me these video images of various moments of their improvisation. And we worked back and forth. I started to then edit them and cut them up because what I knew was that I was going to go into this process called volumetric video capture, which I will show you later. And the cost of this new technology was so incredible that I knew that each performer was going to have about 24 seconds to make a gesture. So this was really interesting as a way of working, to kind of go back and forth. They would send me something, I would chop it up, I would send it back to them. They would then perform the chopped up thing, and we were basically looking for these kind of loops. Here. And we had various meetings and workshops over Zoom. Last one, this is Ryan. So then the idea was how to then extend this archive into the present moment, and media and process would make the most sense. So I started to look for, being in Southern California, the land of special effect and the Hollywood machine, I was really looking for a technology that was sort of emerging. And I became very interested in using the Microsoft's augmented reality studio, which is a studio where it's almost like photogrammetry, where the body is photographed in 360-degree movement by 106 cameras. So I will show you what that looks like here. So this is in the studio. So we narrow it down to, so the cost has to do with all this processing. And so we narrowed down, they were so amazing, these performers. They were really able to kind of synthesize. It was like, going from improv and then synthesizing it down to these like very precise gestures, and trying to get a body to move in a way that loops, because these would remain as sort of looping objects. So basically what happens is it's photographed from all these angles, but in motion, and it will continually repeat that same motion. So I really was, I was so impressed with their ability. So here's what it looks like in the studio. There's these, you don't see the full range, but there's columns all the way around. We're recording sound. You don't hear it very well here. And there are sensors that scan the body to make the sort of frame, the volume. And then there's cameras which are photographing or videoing, filming all the way around the body. And again, this was kind of an amazing process too, because it was one of the few studios in Los Angeles that was able to stay open, because actors are filmed one at a time, isolated in a completely enclosed area. I'm on set as a director. I'm looking at a screen. There's the lighting, everything's set, so it's like a really minimal team. So when nothing else could happen, this was one of the few ways that production could happen. So this became the surprise. This was the first time I worked in this medium, so I didn't know much about how to work in 3D. I was teaching myself as I went along. But after, what happens is the files that you just saw, I would get all the takes, and what I had to do was I had to identify the frame, from what frame to what frame we were going to then process to create this 3D figure, this almost like a hologram of each character. And so when I got the files back from them, I got these flattened out MP4 files. And I was so amazed. I just was kind of I find them horrific and like compelling, and I couldn't really understand the logic either of how and why, it's like, well, it's not 106 pieces, and why, how is it, and why is it torn apart in such a way? But I really became fascinated by these, and this is where the idea of the wallpaper came in, because oh yeah, they still have the sound on. So that is what the flattened out file looks like. When I bring that file into a 3D, let's see, it's called a hollow viewer. I worked in a game engine to actually create the work. So again, a big learning curve. But just as in a moment where you can view them, this is what you see. So this is the same file as the file you just saw in a different piece of software. And it's just how, the algorithm of how it's interpreted. And here, this is just a screen recording of like moving the object. So it also is really very much about this relationship between photography and sculpture. It's this sort of objectness of the body, or the represented body. This is Jo Bell. So for those of you who have seen the work, now you're starting to recognize the characters. This is Ryan. And I'll show you a little more of these as we go forward. Let's see. So, what's sort of interesting as well, so these are skins, they're wraps that go around the geometry, and along with getting the MP4 file, the moving image file, I also receive a folder with all the still images. And so the background color, the ground on which these parts lie is also like a kind of skin tone that is I think a tone that comes from the combination of all of the color in the representation. So what I did was I took one of the stills and I moved the parts around in order to create a tile. And so this is a tile that can then be repeated for ever and ever and ever as a pattern. This is Cecilia, this is Abriel, Cecilia, Gustine, Jo Bell, and Ryan. And this is a previous exhibition of the work, which was part of a larger installation. This is how the work appears for people who haven't been able to see it yet. What I thought I'd do, though, is just show you a few moments of what the work then became. Start here. I made 5 videos, one with each character. So I'm working in a game engine. I have an X and Y, I have an infinite space. The question became, well, where do I put them? They can go anywhere. This becomes a sort of an idea or an issue as well in the construction of 3D states. How convincing or not do you want the environment that you put them in? And I guess along with the rest of my practice, it sort of made sense for me to kind of put them back in a sort of studio, like where they were filmed. but I didn't want to replicate it exactly. I actually had someone model the stands, the lights, the cameras, and I placed them in a circular pattern in the same way. And then I was thinking back because, you know, the earlier videos that you saw where they were filming themselves, I just was really fascinated also by the sort of arbitrariness of these backgrounds where they were filming themselves, whether it was a parking lot or inside their home. So I started to think about that sort of idea of the backdrop. I found a catalog online which was you know, a cinema backdrop catalog, and I started going through the catalog, and I just grabbed these really low-res JPEG images of, you know, film backdrops, and made, you know, kind of these volumes that I wrapped these backdrops against, and so. Yeah, really kind of intuitively making certain associations. Ryan felt very Roman to me, so I went for this, you know, painted backdrop of architecture. And so what I'm also interested in is, you know, in refilming these bodies, is where the technology falls apart, where the cameras can't see. There's this thing that I'm really interested in the moment, which is this sort of camera and capture, and what can be captured and what can't be captured. So the cameras can't get under the arms, or the cameras can't get between the fingers, and so there's this strange pixelation and glitch and dissolve that happens in those areas. That I found really interesting. So I wanted to make sure the camera came very close to the bodies, so that was really highlighted. And really the way that it's then filmed is filmed with virtual cameras, is really these circular scripts or tracks that the camera follows, and as it works its way, let me go here. It just worked its way further and further out. Where you start to see more and more of the set that they're filmed on. I just show you then one last short clip of how they appeared in the installation. They're shown on quite large life-size monitors that are dollies that have them in kind of leaning position, almost like how you look at your phone, but oversized. And they're playing at the same time. Thank you.
So if everyone could come up, and we'll turn on the light. And wow. So first I thought, questions for each other, because like there's so many interesting overlaps, and I don't know if any of you have any questions. I do, but I'd like to leave this space first.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. I wanted to say something interesting about, I mean, it's not so much a question, but when I was watching the videos of your animatronic bodies moving in a particular, this machinic way, I was actually thinking about how the figures in my work were also moving. There's something in that space between a kind of liveness and dead and undeadness, where it's you anthropomorphize, you think of it as alive because it's moving, and you think about a human and how it is a human, but it's also mechanical or a machine or something else, and that tension, that sort of artificialness is something I found fascinating and I'm really interested in. It's not really questions, maybe more of an observation.
Yes, I am really interested about the movement, how it could be produced, or how it's like a maintain you keeping moving. So I always think about how the things move, or the people or the person.
How do you then decide that articulation? Do you map it from a body, or do you start with, is it intuitive? Do you just watch it move, or is it like motion capture, or?
It was funny, but when I found Olga, that is the first one, I was playing with her, not to see how the articulations work, but to have a distance and could see the movements. I need to put transparent threads to the ceiling, and I was moving with all my body, the other body, not to understand, because it's difficult to replicate, in the way that is it could be easy, how is walking someone. So it was with my feet and my hands.
Puppets, yeah. Marionettes.
To try to understand and make a video it could be more in the way how children learned how to walk, or us, is learning how to walk from the beginning. So I needed to understand how Olga could walk, so it was, like this way.
Questions from the floor? Or, yes.
So I have two questions. I have one for Louise and one for Lynne. So, Louise, your photo montage, it's really clear that you have your own connections with the images, and you're also asking us to make the connections. But I wanted to know what your process is for, going through all your clips, how you're laying it all out, the kind of space, and how long it takes you to do the mergers and what goes and what doesn't go until you laminate. And Lynne, to go back on the project with the gestures, have you thought about the gestures and the video capture in relation to what's going on in social media with gesturing on TikTok or gesturing on Instagram?
Do you want to go
Sure.
first?
I mean, I don't know if is this even working? It is? Okay, great. You asked about the process of selection and kind of building the story through the images. And I guess in a way it's a little bit like the marionette, using your arms and feet to, so, I mean, it's a little bit pedantic. I collect books and magazines secondhand, so I just buy as many cheap publications as possible. And then I flip through thousands and thousands of pages. and wait for something to jump out. So I don't have a predetermined idea of what the story will be about. I might have a general sense, but I don't have any predetermined storyline. So I'll just wait for an image to pop out, so I'll cut it out. So after a while, you have a pile of images, and they start to kind of cluster on their own. So, I don't know, there might be images of people pointing at blank things, so that becomes a kind of cluster, or another cluster of whatever, like people cutting something. And then and then those clusters start to kind of suggest a sequence to them. Like, okay, well, maybe you need a blank thing before you cut it, so that blank thing happens first and then the cutting happens next. I'm making this up, like I'm not saying that this is actually how it happened, but just the general intuitive process of it. And then there's a moment at which the editing has to happen. So like there are way more images than I could use and way more stories or storylines that could make sense in an artwork. And so that's kind of the moment at which I really have to reflect on what I'm trying to get at, because there are many seductive things I would be interested to say, but they don't all necessarily have a place in the artwork. One thing I'll say just to end is I've been doing this since 2000, so I've been making these albums for, 22 years. Craziness. And at first, it was to help me see what I was thinking. Like I didn't know what I was thinking. I needed to see what I was thinking, right? And the first album I did showed me so much that I've kept doing it for 22 years. So it just was like a flashlight, like, oh my God, this is a really useful process. And I know that I'm happy with an album whenever I think thoughts I didn't have, like I'm able to think things I didn't think I thought. Often the thoughts turn out weirder than my brain, than I identify with. So like often there are subtexts that are kind of sinister or like disturbing that my conscious mind won't let me accept. So this is a really good way of this kind of marionette dance to arrive at something. So it's very intuitive. It's definitely intuitive, but it does require a moment of like kind of editing where you have to kind of commit. You have to make choices within the intuition. You have to kind of like, or the choreography, like out of all the improvisation, you have to kind of, okay, this is the loop, and then you elaborate it. So maybe that's a nice segue for your.
Well, I was just thinking of Warburg while you're talking, because this is exactly what he was doing, right? He was basically making, thinking through collection and collage and creating these theses, but nothing was, he made notes, but he didn't write the essay, nothing. So it's really still this living body of constant interpretation. Everybody's going back to this archive and going back to these panels and trying to make different constellations and make sense of it. And so it's wonderful. TikTok, yes, of course, because we couldn't actually, the idea was that all the dancers would work in a studio and we'd, and that couldn't happen. And so the sharing of these videos back and forth really, directly, made us all think about TikTok. And they were, the project was being made, right at Black Lives Matter riots happening riots, protests, violence, confusion, anger, a lot was happening from March, or in 2020 in particular, when the work is being made. And so I think that, we had a lot of discussions with as a group, the performers and I, and Gustine, for example, her gesture is really coming from things that she felt were in the media. So it really was, the project really was to contemporize, to bring forward this archive of gestures, and so those formats, what we were seeing on social media, what we were seeing in the media, became also really important for the performers in the work. And did you have another question? Did I answer?
Not quite.
Whoa.
No, I just see this thing, you're doing this volumetric scanning of the bodies, and I just see a lot on TikTok, it's just it's not really theatrical or even dance at this point. It's literally people just doing head turns and spins and wearing outfits. And I saw this direct correlation with what you're doing with these gestures and the scanning, it's I think I'm kind of losing my train of thought on it, but there's just this interesting relation that with the backdrops, there's this thing of you can put any backdrop and everything about it's just aestheticized. And I just don't really, I think this is one of the few video projects I've seen recently that's just all about gesture and nothing else. And that's all that content is online, it's just gesture and nothing else. That's what it is, it's all just modeling. These folks on social media, they're doing the same thing in this project, but they're modeling from one perspective, and they're doing it for their own pleasure, I guess, or their own hits or their own likes, but the whole system wants more modeling data.
So I'm going to pick up on your comments and shift the conversation, include it, but move it somewhere else. One thing that's super interesting to me about the presentation that I had not thought about before is the connection between Celina, Louis, and Lynne. And the question, this notion of the kind of self-generating background. So you were talking about, you get these fragments of images and the algorithm generates a color, right? And Louis, you were talking about, I was kind of reading your kind of blank for City Hall in a way as this kind of, again, self-generating background. It's like the power that be generating this as a background for the future. And Celina, it's the same thing, well, very different materiality, but that, the work, and in all cases, it's like the image that is also a space. Right? And your work is very much of an image, but it's also literally an architecture. So, so I'd like you to kind of talk about that, the kind of self-generation, the double status as image and space, and yeah. Who wants to go first?
I'm gonna think in it. Okay. If you want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I was seeing the green space in the production studio, that's literally liquid space, right? It says this space, we have zero. It's the most liquid space possible.
It does not exist. Yeah,
you could turn it into whatever background you want it to be. So when I was seeing the production, I was thinking about oh yeah, so this is a studio of liquid space, or the fantasy of liquidity. I call that fantasy of liquidity, I associated it with colonization. I do think we've inherited that fantasy here in this place through histories of colonization. There are probably other paths to it, but that's the one I kind of underline. And there are, for me, it's very important that in the albums, there's there's always a moment when looking at the images takes on an almost architectural situation where the images jump out of the image panels and kind of suck the viewer into a zone. So when I showed the Pipilari Res kind of pressing on the panel, that's a moment where that is no longer an image. that we spectate in front of us. She's kind of now sucking us into her space, and now we have a very different relationship to it than a mere spectator. You know, so for me, there's always a moment in most of the albums where this image becomes kind of architectural. I mean, not in the sense of your practice, obviously, but there's a moment at which there's a weird flipping that happens where the framed thing is now doing the framing, and then we experience things as viewers. Yeah, I don't know if, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of, there's an Argentinian author that called Oscar Mazota, and he basically made a book about an author that calls Roberto Art, and basically he took art to say what he wants to. He talks about the whole literature. And for me, I think that the architecture like allows me to get more stuff that if maybe I will do it just drawing, will not be able to have these other layers, like the body experience. At the same time, I think that my work has a lot to do with collage, like the idea of patchwork, of put one thing on top of the other, like make these relations that has unions. In my case, it has the thread underneath. So yeah, I think that for me, like when I start to work with the space or think in the space or in the architecture, was like the body responding to some physical needs that the work start to request. Like I think that for me it's something that the work requested, not something that I start to think like I'm gonna do architecture or this is my interest. I try to listen a lot how the work can develop. It's like I can talk with that because basically it's a visual work. So I think that if I think it in the traditional way with words, there's a visual part that will miss, because if not, I think I will write a poem.
Yeah.
But I decide that the image start to make their own bond, and also with the space. So I think there's a lot of bond in the idea of collage to get some parts and make a whole space of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm deviating from your question, but kind of following on. But this notion of collage is the green screen it just signals that, right? I think the project for me is also, and maybe this comes back to clarifying what you were asking, is really about the construction of the image. So it's very empty, right? And I'm critical of, but also very interested in that empty image and this idea. So on the one hand, it could be read as superfluous. On the other hand, it can be a space of invention, a space to, because it's emptied out, it can be a space of possibilities. So I think it has these two tiers, but it's in the wallpaper, there's from a distance, it's hard to distinguish the figure ground, right? And you kind of have movement and collage, and then as you it does different things as you approach, and so this idea, I guess, of the apparatus, how that performs, how the collaging is made apparent, the construction is made apparent, and how that the oscillation between that figure ground is interesting to me.
Okay, yay. I'm going to repeat your question. So ask it and I'll repeat it for the people online so they can hear us. So maybe Stephanie.
Yeah, and thank you all for such interesting talks. One of the things that came up that I think ties into this kind of question or reflection on the empty space and the void is when you were reading at the end and talking about the way that value is created in these lots is to remove what's there, right? And you went through the whole talk about the history and removing the history. And it's very, Walter Benjamin, right? In order to go forward, we have to go backwards. And I see that, right, in this relationship of these empty spaces and these new constructions. And then in thinking about hospitality, right, we give of ourselves in order to create the value between, the reciprocity. And I was just wondering if anyone would be interested in reflecting on that in terms of your work or each other's work.
I can't rephrase that question, so we'll just go.
We need to pass the microphone.
Yeah, I think, Anna, you have the mic right there. Yeah. So for the future, we'll move it around. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just to add a slight tinge to this, because in my notion of hospitality, it's not about reciprocity, because reciprocity is a notion of duty. And my project theoretically is to free hospitality from the home and to free it also from any notion of debt and duty. And so that's a huge kind of theoretical, so yes, I would just kind of throw that in and see where we go with that.
It's a little messed up thinking of the gift reciprocity versus hospitality.
I find that helpful to hear because it's true. For me, the word hospitality implies, the things you mentioned about reciprocity, the gift, and something that we often ignore about gifts is the duty. Like a gift is actually a debt,
It's a contract.
It's a,
And
and it's a debt that has to pretend it's not a debt. So both people have to pretend to understand that the gift is only a gift, right? And so we build a community because we both pretend in the same way, right? So the gift structures a community because we now are pretending in the same, we're following the same rule of pretension. I'm glad that you're taking it away from that, because it frees my brain to think in other directions. Just in terms of reciprocity, though, I think one interesting thing as an artist participating in a group exhibition, meeting most of the artists for the first time, and also seeing our work in relation to each other for the first time, there's a dimension of reciprocity there that I think is very interesting. And I don't know if it's interesting to listen to, but it's definitely interesting to experience. Like, I don't know, like Adam's piece is, over there, is across from the Sphinx statue. And I've been watching those two pieces kind of hang out together for a couple of days. And they're doing something really weird together. And I don't know if I call that reciprocity, but it has a dimension of reciprocity. But it's a reciprocity that kind of happened after the fact. Like it's interesting to think of curatorial practice as, I guess, almost like a choreography. You set up a score, you pull these things together, everybody works to install it and do all that stuff. But once it's done, an action is launched that kind of nobody could have predicted, but it's kind of now we're in the middle of that action as viewers, and I think that's a dimension of reciprocity that I've definitely been experiencing these last couple of days because of the weird resonances between everybody's work. Like it's a little bit uncanny, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
Like,
no, it's not. It's very thought through. Yeah, I mean, uncanny and, yeah.
Well, it's kind of a collage also.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like to make,
Yes.
like put a lot of parts that came from different places, live different situations, speak another languages. I think that exhibition is the most similar to a conceptual or thinking collage.
I guess your question
Yeah.
made me think about,
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry.
Just-
Go for it.
I was just going to say that this notion of, like, can you think about hospitality in relation to the avatar? You know, like as the, and I was just thinking of Berenice's work and like how you, the empathy, the kind of like involvement to anthropomorphize a moving image or an object, like to bring it more to life or something. If there's something, yeah, it's just, that occurred to me while we were.
Yes, I also remember, for example, another connection between us, because there is like a robotic arm now that is called Rodin 4D, and you have this robotic arm to sculpt the body of the patient to produce the orthosis. So the first step is to scan the patient. So they need to scan it, and there is go to this software that is called Rodin 4D, and after that you put the block of the polyurethane inside of the machine, and in the case, for example, of scoliosis, you need to make to try to push the other side to control the curve of the scoliosis, but you have this software where you can make the modifications directly as you are making modifications to the body. And the final result is this like a block with the shape of the patient to produce the orthosis. But you can make more or less just these kind of modifications as you can decide that in this like a green room. So it's a really nice connection.
And I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions. So Slinko, you had a question.
Small question, I guess. So I am very interested in liquidity in the context of course, the market, like valuations and stuff. But I was thinking, I was listening to all of you guys, and there's a certain, like a flip of that meaning in my mind just popped up in terms of, so you describe liquidity as the refusal to commit to something. You know? But I was wondering, what's your refusal to commit to an existing meaning, and so you allow yourself for more self-definition? So this liquidity of meaning, is that something that maybe comes to your mind when you try to kind of describe these new territories, whether it's a new parking lot or the relationship between images or like a digitized human body or refusal to define yourself as an able body, but a body that is modified, or the refusal of meaning in poetic terms, you know, you keep it just open.
Sorry, I don't understand the last part. Can you?
The question was framed around the notion of liquidity and taking it and moving it from the market term into the area of meaning creation. So in your practices, the lack of commitment to existing meaning, does that allow you to, like, the form of refusal to adhere to something? Because it's a similar form of refusal to commit to value in the market terms, because it's like a quick liquidation of asset. But I think in artistic terms, it's a sort of like a more, it's like a positive negative in a way. I'm not sure if I'm explaining well.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure to understand. I'm so sorry. I feel really bad, but idiomatic sometimes. I'm.
But is that the openness that you talk about in your work? Like, I guess that's what you're saying, right? Is the liquidity is this, the way in which you were talking about my work proposes questions. I don't try to make a solid, you know, there's
Oh, yeah, now now I get it.
When you said I refuse to have answers, that's a form of like a negative.
No, it's not that I refuse, but I think it's the way that the work develops. Like what happened, I was talking in reference to the public, when a lot of times the public asks me what this drawing means, and I think that's, and I was referring particularly to this, that it has to be more than words for that kind of works of art, because there's also an ideological thing about that, and what I mean with this is that I remember one time I go to the Tate, and there was a lot of European artists, mostly, and the European artists basically were like colors and an amazing work, like physical work of arts, paints. And there was one room for an African artist and one room for Latin American artist. And I remember those two works were about suffering, totally like the worst things of the world, that I think that every country has that, but you see like literally how the imagination or the has a tremendous like political decision, because it's like it's reserved for the people that are good, like the first world, but you're not allowed like to imagine. If your country goes really bad, you cannot imagine. So I think like it's not a non-political commitment. It is a kind of or political or ideological. Everything is ideological, but I think that it uses another terms and conditions that that are not like the manifest something. Yeah. I don't know if I answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I say? I'm going to give an example of liquidity, and then I'm going to try to interpret what I think your question was about to see if I'm understanding it correctly. So I'll give an example of liquidity as I understand it. So, there's often the expression like, you can love your family, but you're stuck with them, right? Your family is not liquid, right? Those are relationships that are not very liquid, right? And every person in a family knows that. Sometimes, that uncle, that aunt, that sister, that brother, my mom, my dad, they get on my nerves, but you have to show up for the birthday party, you have to, so you're stuck with them. They're not very liquid. By comparison, your circle of friends is a lot more liquid because you get to pick, and if they misbehave, you can not invite them to your hangout next time. And so then they evaporate, right? And our technology allows us to do that very quickly, right? I can block someone and literally never see them again, and they'll never see me again on the media. So we have machines that encourage us to see our relationships as extremely liquid, right? To fantasize that our relationships are extremely liquid. So that's just an example. I just want to kind of get a little bit of a concreteness of what I mean by that word outside of the realm of investment. And I link that to colonialism, but you said, but could there be positive values in this liquidity, namely the artistic impulse to look at something from a different angle or interpret meaning in a less rigid way, to loosen up meaning? Isn't that kind of injecting a kind of liquidity into something? And isn't that exactly what artists do? Did I understand your question?
Pretty much.
Okay.
If you don't adhere to certain meaning of, like, say, structural meanings that we've naturalized and
Of
absorbed
course.
as existing, then you do not commit to that meaning, so that becomes liquid.
Yeah. So I would say yes. In fact, artists do pay attention to when things have become too stuck as habitual forms. And I think liquidity is our habit now. like it has become our default stuck mode. That's what I'll just say about that. So artists notice what things have become too stuck, and we like to kind of shake them up a little bit. Now, I would say that's not liquidity as I defined it earlier, because I think artists, we're stuck with what we've loosened up, right? Like, we have to do talks about them and show what we've done. And so we've loosened something, but we're also stuck with those things. They become part of our work. So yes, I think there's an element of liquidity that's intrinsic as a positive value of artistic practice, but it's different from the liquidity of kind of blocking people, because you're stuck with what you've loosened up, and that produces different fantasies than I am a free-floating agent, free to express myself wherever I go, right? As your example from Tate shows, artists are not free-floating agents that get to express themselves wherever we go. Those things are highly structured. Yeah, so yes and no is the shorter, yeah.
Exceeded our time, so we'll have one last question from Jean-Charles, and that will be it.
I wanted to speak with this liquidity and this idea of being attached to what we are doing as makers, and especially for Berenice, which is super about gravity and equilibrium, and so it's so no liquid what you are doing, I think. And there is also this question of fidelity between the prosthesis and the body and all this stuff. And on the other end, I don't feel there is any attachment to one of them, because you are producing so much, and so you are repeating so much the same kind of bodies, and it's always groups of bodies. And I don't think that there is the question of empathy for each of these figures is really specific in your work. So I think that this liquidity or this detachment can rising in terms of quantity of what you are doing, of what you are making. And there is also, I just wanted to know what is your relationship to your work. How intimate you can be, or how can you be attached to each of them, because it's like tree leaves, what you are doing. Tree leaves are super similar to each of, each are unique, but they are super similar. And when I see your work, I see just groups or I don't know if I'm. And of course there is also this for speaking about this economic fluidity. There is also that you are showing a lot your work this month or this year. I don't know. And there is also, so is it a strategy that you put in place because you have to feed all these spaces, or even when it was quite more confidential, you were already in this quantity of bodies?
Okay. I'm not sure if I understood everything.
We have the language. There's multiple languages in the room.
But I will try, no? Maybe I need to come back to the concept of hospitality, because I consider that is like is to have a kind of responsibility for an unknown nature or unknown community, which can affect you. It's like to be affected, no? And you are changing, change you as you are getting closer to that nature. So you become to be responsible of that, no? That is affect you, and you are affect also that you are approaching. So it's a more or less long story, but I was working in a rehabilitation center for child. So when I decided to go too deep as possible, because for me it's a research project, no? Yeah, and it's also a research about my own and the humanity, no? In general, like what is the condition and what it means. So I am still in the middle of the research. So I am not sure how I am like a really clearly way to get to there. But I am also like try to cross in different natures, not only like this hierarchical view of the anthropocentrism or just thinking about the human, but how to become to depart from one of the human shape or form, as for example the stump of the leg, become closer to another species or another natures. So I am interested to think about also in the interspecies being, no, in which way we are connected together with another forms of life, and what it means, like be responsible or be affected and affect the other forms of life. Or
That note, I think, full. Thanks so much. And I'd invite you all to join us on the 21st of November at 6:30 p.m. when Adam Faramawi will be doing a Zoom lecture. So please join us for that, and we'll see you then.